did the Europe and how everything transitioned through Europe. We did that whole process of obviously the centuries, 12th and 13th century tavern explosion in Europe, Central Europe, and obviously the island Great Britain. So basically, what we touched about as well was sugarcane and how it moved and how the colonization happened, and this was all in the period of taverns and people giving hospitality, people giving, like I said, home away from home. So basically the tavern keeper, the owners were basically giving what they can to strangers, because social media wasn't in there, internet wasn't there, so it wasn't much to know about a person except for that person walking in and then obviously being accommodated. As well as now, I guess it's just now everybody's more into wine and connected versus before. So we're just going to touch base on what was going on in the Caribbean and that area before we go to America. So basically in 1604 there was a civil conduct that was placed between the countries England, France and Spain to obviously act in the matter, but that civil conduct didn't include Caribbean. So basically that's why Caribbean was such a place of obviously historic significance for rum, but also a lot of battles and a lot of fight for power with sugar, obviously vanilla, tobacco, anything that was generating wealth. That was happening in the 1604, and then obviously 1718 is when privateering was abolished. So privateering was abolished, and that basically meant that you had two choices. Some people decided, as we said, privateers were pirates with papers, so legal pirates. So basically it meant that either you continue doing what you're doing and chances are you're gonna get killed, obviously, or you legalize your business as some did. So some obviously decided to go legal. Even Blackbeard decided to go legal, but he ended his time in Virginia, because obviously when you have such a name, you're bound to see the repercussion of obviously consequences of your life, right? So King George I was actually the person that ended privateering and gave the choice to people what they're gonna do. So when that happened, it was basically the end of an era. Prince Henry was still searching for a way to get that naval strength on. There was a Navy school as well. So at the time there was still some things going on in that Demeter. Yeah, just so we understand, obviously, that Sir Henry Morgan as well. So a lot of people were seeing how they're gonna obviously work and get out of the business they were in. So we touched base, and the last segment that we talked about in the last class was how Jamaica was getting towards that big exportation of sugar and producing of sugar after Barbados, because obviously, as we said, it was a much harsher environment than Barbados for European settlers. So as we touched base on that topic, we're going to touch on America and what was going in America. Obviously, rum was super popular in America. It was definitely one of the ingredients that was popularized not only by Washington, but also by a lot of other people that founded rum. Rum was used or drank at ships, Navy ships as well. So basically, rum was a big part, especially because water after a certain amount of sailing can go bad. Algae were forming on it, so people were moving more towards rum as well. So we see now the influence of molasses and how it came to be such a big thing. But before, we need to go back to tafia. So basically, tafia was what the people working on plantations, people that came from Europe or slaves were drinking. It was made from molasses. At that time of the moment, people were regarding molasses as a waste product. So obviously, people that were working the fields used molasses into making tafia. Basically, was a harsher rum, but after a while and distillation methods and things like that, rum started to be what it is today. Obviously, after the New England rum and America also making rum, it came into what it is today. We're just going to touch base on what we talked about for the history. So the 16th century, why Caribbean was so popular for English, French, and Spanish in a period because why that area was so left for privateering and buccaneers was because the conquistadors, actually the Spanish, how you call it, the Spanish settlers, the Spanish conquerors, they turned more to Mexico and Peru. A lot of people think it was because of gold. So what was left was obviously for privateers, pirates, to do what they were doing, and obviously for big powers to fight over the territory while the common man was still trying to make the best living and trying to work on plantations. And eventually, if he got there through an agreement or through a contract to finish the contract and then eventually gain his land and continue. So that was a big period in the whole tavern craft and the whole hospitality craft, because like most taverns were at ports. Picture like most taverns were basically coming forward, like where gold mines were, or where like people would transit, people would come in, and so on and so forth. So basically, it was a rough and tough and how you call it, a time when people didn't know what to expect. Then we go back to 1640 to William Keith, who was the governor of New Amsterdam. That's when the first New World distillery was made. So now we're going into distillation process, a massive distillation process through America. So 1640 and 1664 was when the British took over New Amsterdam. So the British came in, and from there we see a lot of changes. A lot of changes that are going to influence obviously the American history, but also the bartending history in the US. So basically, what was going on when William Keith was making the distillery, obviously some say it was supposed to be a gin distillery, but the profits and the easy access to sugar and molasses and how cheap molasses was, that was the main spirit at the time. So they started to focus on spirit. Obviously, since seeing that, the British started to implement two acts, the Molasses Act and the Sugar Act. So the Molasses Act was at 1733, and the Sugar Act came a bit later, 30 years or so later, 1764. Yeah, 1764. So as those things were showing, and as those things were happening, what it meant was there was more tax paid on molasses made from sugar imported from Caribbean than non-British islands. So that meant that obviously Britain was trying to obviously profit more from the sugar, but not only that, the beer as well, because the beer style, the British beer style, was also being taxed less, and so on and so forth. So there was this big battle still for economics, and obviously when George Washington was supporting the domestic growth, things started to change, and we saw a lot of political support from the governing bodies in that sense. John Adams, he's the second president of the U.S. United States. He wrote that we should not, like blush our cheeks because molasses had a huge part in our independence. What that meant was basically how molasses was going and how important it was for the people at the time. It was much more important to sustain, so the taxation without representation only made it difficult. So basically, eventually, the Brits were fought off. The Boston Tea Party happened, and many other things prior to that for the independence to happen. Obviously, it wasn't just because of rum or beer, but they were elements towards that part of our history happening as well. To tune in into the tavern and the bartender life, we need to understand, obviously, the ice played a big part in the history of the cocktail and the history of the tavern. Before, it was mostly punches, so mostly tavern keepers were trying to make their punch recipe the best. So basically, every tavern had a certain approach to a punch, and punch was a major drink thing at the time. Obviously, with ice coming, the first invention of the of the ice maker, in a sense, was 1748. We got 10 more minutes. 1748, but it took a long time after that until things actually started moving forward with ice production and so on and so forth. Frederick Tudor was, some say, king of ice. He was in the early 19th century. What he was doing, and basically what people before were doing, was producing ice. So what he was doing is he was transporting ice to Cuba, and his idea was to transport ice to India as well. So he was making a lot of wealth, generating a lot of wealth from ice gathering. So snow or cutting big pieces of lake and transporting ice. Ice was a big luxury. So it was a big luxury for a very long time. Some people say until the 1920s, yes, until the 1920s, so pre-prohibition, 1% of America's population had ice makers or refrigeration. Ice makers. Ice making. So it was a process. As you can see, in the beginning, how the French took towards the ice and from the Romans, obviously. So to backtrack a bit, how people were making ice before all of this happened, the ancient Egyptians, India, as well as Romans. So basically there were many tactics in Scandinavia. They would obviously gather snow or just cut big pieces of frozen lakes. In the desert at nights when it's cold, people would dig in like big spaces to fill in water and basically take in from the top, which was frozen. So there was many ways of gathering ice prior to it becoming popular. Obviously before people were making fun of ice being used, it wasn't a common thing just to like chill things until basically most of the common drinks started to be chilled, right? So it was a process like anything else. So to go back to Frederick Tudor, as he was making his monopole and doing great with ice, obviously he didn't want the refrigeration system nor the ice making system to come to be about. So he was really lobbying against it, because obviously that was his main income and concern. So tafia, as we said, was the first basically view or the first sign of rum to come. Punch and New England rum were very popular as it happened, as taxation happened, and as things were changing, and as European settlers found more land that was fertile, and as they planted more things, and as crop grew, so did the American whiskey start to be about, and there was a period of fading with rum and the whiskey getting that glimpse of being the spirit of choice. Obviously, with the same time as the beer was being more taxed, the alcohol was being more taxed than the beer was more of a common drink, and then whiskey, due to being more expensive, and then obviously when the aging process came into play, was more of a luxury item. So basically beer was still considered the national drink, the drink of choice. Obviously a bit less than wine, and rum was definitely a very important thing in that source. So now that we see how all these things happen, now we can understand basically what the innkeepers, the barkeeps, the taverns, the salons, the beer gardens, the cafes, what they were going through, and what was like the surrounding situation of all these establishments in the history of the world, but also what was going on at the time and what everybody was dealing with. Obviously, for the next class that we're not going to be doing from Swizzle, and once we touch base on the certain stages of development of the cocktail, and how obviously more about ice and how ice came into play, we're going to understand or see more how things evolved and how they went, from Asia with the different dynasties and the monopole and the battle of the power and the India companies and what they were doing, and the monopoly of spices and sugar, and obviously what happened with sugar, how it fell down. Obviously sugar started to fall down as well by the abolishment of slavery, but not only that, by sugar beet as well coming into play, and a lot of people starting to get sugar from the sugar beet, and then sugarcane was kind of falling off radar for a bit. So there were a lot of things happening while our craft was actually being starting off as a hospitality and as a service craft, and what it is still today, no matter how we make our drinks or no matter what we do. So yes, I hope this class was informative, and all 3 classes that were nice, and now maybe you understand why we did Swizzle Rum Bar and Drinkery, and why this period of rum, but not only rum, this period of pre-colonization and around the 18th, earlier and later, were so important to make this our home, and to make the whole Barkeep segment here, and then just to try to portray a different time to our guests. So by that being said, I think hopefully we'll be back here soon. I hope so. I know all the team wishes everybody the best and sends them much love. I know that for a fact, so we're in contact all the time. Yes, guys, hope this blows up fast, and I hope I see you all very, very soon. Until then, stay safe and much love. Take care, guys.